But there's a difference between small problems versus bigger problems. Well, some deals have big problems, as I'm sure you can imagine. Some deals have big problems. But for first-time business buyers and for earlier, more novice acquirers, desire to get in the game often can be very intoxicating. And this is common for buyers when they're close to doing their first deal. Maybe they have a 9-to-5 job, they can't wait to get out of it. They have all these, maybe they have doubt from their friends and family. And so when you have a deal and it's under contract and you're going through diligence and you find fleas, but you're close to closing, the temptation is there to say, hey, do you know what? It's not that big of a deal. I'll fix it later. I don't want to have to renegotiate. Let's just close. And so, without getting into the details of what can happen if you do close on something that's filled with problems, that's pretty self-evident. You can have huge problems, and worst case scenario, you default on your loan or lose a ton of money. But what I've seen from firsthand experience, and this is really the point of the video, is when I've walked away and when clients I've worked with have walked away or said, hey, we're going to walk, or hey, if we don't get this, we're going to walk. Usually, as a first-time buyer, you would think that in that moment, the seller is going to say, bye-bye, have a nice life, don't let the door hit you on the way out, right? There's this fear as a buyer that we have that if we walk away or threaten to walk, we're going to get that kind of response. But if you do a good, thorough job during diligence, and this is the key, if you really investigate the deal and you find red flags and you're able to point those red flags out in a very matter-of-fact way and say, hey, you go to the seller and say, because of X, Y, and Z, we need to reduce our purchase price to this, or else we're going to walk. When you're able to point to the problems and explain why these problems are very impactful, very negative, and when you're willing to walk, often in that moment in time, the seller will realize their business is flawed or their asset that they're selling is flawed. This is the same in property, that for whatever reason, there's a meaningful flaw, and they will realize, they being the seller, they will realize in that moment or in the coming moments that any other buyer that's going to come down the road in the future is going to see the same thing. And in that moment in time, they realize, do you know what? Why don't I just cut my losses and make a deal, because we're so close right here and now with this buyer I'm dealing with in this very moment, right? If you're the buyer that finds all these problems in diligence, you're already under contract, you've already worked through all these details, you probably already have a lender that's in play, you have your equity that's potentially ready to rumble, you have your capital all but ready, the lawyer's in place, the closing attorney's in place, you have a closing date probably already picked out, and then you point out these problems as a buyer and say, I will walk away if I don't get X, Y, and Z because of X, Y, and Z problems. Very, very common for sellers to acquiesce, to massively renegotiate, and it's so much easier than you think as the buyer to impose your will and get what you want.